Chapter 10 Windmaster in White, Bellowing Sandstorms from Nowhere. Shaylien unconsciously stepped forward to stand in front of Sanlong. I know better than anyone where my place is, Shaylien replied. Then how dare you still stand next to him, Fuyao shouted. Because if I stand next to him, the snakes won't come, Shaylien answered earnestly. Hearing the response, Sanlong pfft and laughed out loud. Fuyao grew grimmer. You! Grimmer and grimmer. His face suddenly turned completely black. It wasn't just his face, but Shaylian's entire view that dimmed into darkness. The screen of flames and the ring of fire created by Fuyao were suddenly completely extinguished. Within the darkness, Shaylien heard Sanlong snicker and say, "Useless trash." Then he felt Sanlong grip his shoulders to pull him close. Soon after, Shaylien heard a sudden downpour of endless battering above them, like a thunderstorm hitting an umbrella. Needless to say, now that the defense barrier was gone, the snake deluge came pouring down like mad. The open umbrella was blocking the downpour, and Shaylien could smell the thick, foul stench of blood. He was about to fight, but Sanlong stopped him. "Don't move. No lowlives will dare approach." His tone was confident. The first sentence was soft and gentle, the second arrogant. Shaylien wasn't worried, but hearing Fuyao's angry roars across the pit, sounding like he was getting bombarded by snakes, he called out, "Sanlong!" "No," Sanlong instantly replied. Shaylien didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "How did you know what I was going to say?" "Don't worry so much. He can't die," Sanlong said. Just then, another roar came from ahead of them in the pit. "Banyu! If you want me to die, have them bite and kill me in one go. What the hell is this?" "It's not me," Banyu cried. It seemed that Kimo had awoken after the punch, discovered himself submerged in countless snakes, and believed it to be Banyu's doing. "Fuyao, can you light another fire? Do it again," Shaylien shouted. Fuyao gritted his teeth. "That cad next to you is restricting my powers. I can't light anything." Shaylien felt dread, and Sanlong said, "It's not me." "I know it's not you," Shaylien said, "but that's precisely what's wrong. Both Banyu and Kimo are bound by the immortal binding rope, so they can't use their powers. My powers are depleted, and you're not restricting anyone, meaning there's a sixth person in this pit." "Have you lost your mind?" Fuyao demanded. "What sixth person? No one else came down." "Who's there?" Banyu suddenly said. "Banyu, what's happening? Is someone over there?" Shaylien asked. "Someone—" Banyu's voice cut off. Whether her mouth was sealed shut or she lost consciousness, they didn't know. Shaylien called out again, "Banyu!" Fuyao was still fighting snakes, and brief flashes of white light blasted in waves in the darkness. "Be careful! She might be tricking you." "Not necessarily," Shaylien shouted. "I'm going to save her first." Shaylien was about to run into the snake deluge when he heard Sanlong's voice next to his ear. "All right." Shaylien felt the hand gripping his shoulders tighten, and in a flash they were dashing forward. Shaylien realized in awe that the youth was advancing and attacking at the same time, but with an umbrella in one hand and him in the other. In the darkness, silver shimmers flashed about once more, clanking and clinking, when suddenly the sharp sound of two swords clashing rang in everyone's ears. "Oh?" Sanlong said. "There really is a sixth person. Interesting." Shaylien had no idea how Sanlong was controlling the weapon, or what kind of weapon it was. But whatever it was, it most certainly did crash head to head into another. His opponent remained silent, and Shaylien could only hear metal scraping metal as the fight intensified. From time to time there would be sparks flashing in the dark, but each flash was so short-lived it was hard to see the other's face. Shaylien listened to the fight while calling out, "Banyu, are you still conscious? Can you respond?" No one responded. Fuyao exclaimed, "Maybe the one fighting now is her." "No, that is definitely not Banyu," Shaylien said. While both times were in the dark, when Sanlong fought Kimo, he was light-footed and messing about. toying with the man. This fight, however, Shailian could tell San Lang was taking more seriously. The opponent was extremely skilled in martial arts and weaponry. Banyu was small and weak. From the look of her limbs alone, it was obvious that strength and weaponry were not her forte, so it was impossible for her to be the one fighting San Lang. But who was this sixth person? When did they appear? Fu Yao griped. Someone who would betray her own country is no different from Xuanji. Why on earth do you still believe in her? Fu Yao, can you not be so irritated all of a sudden? Shailian said. Wait, what did you just say? Fu Yao struck out another palm and blew away a bunch of snakes. I said, why on earth would you believe in her, like you believe in that cad next to you? No, not that. You said Xuanji. You mentioned Xuanji's name, didn't you? Shailian said. Yeah, so what? She's completely irrelevant. Shailian, however, held his breath. A moment later, he called out, Stop fighting! There's no more need to hide. I know who you are. The sound of blades clashing never halted. The other was unmoved, but Shailian wasn't worried. Did you think I was bluffing when I said I already know who you are, General Pei Jr.? Who are you talking to? Fu Yao was dumbstruck. General Pei Jr.? Don't be crazy. Who do you think he is? If he descended, everyone would know. You're very right, Shailian said. But what if it wasn't his true self that descended? In the darkness, the fighting weapons faltered for a split second, then picked up anew. Shailian continued. It took me too long to figure this out. I should have known from the beginning. I knew that for close to 200 years there was something causing havoc, but none of the heavenly officials cared, and no one dared to speak of it. So there had to be someone no one wanted to offend keeping this scandal under wraps. Since I wasn't familiar with many of the officials, I didn't dare boldly pin this on anyone, and never tried to boldly deduce which heavenly official it could be. It was Fu Yao's mention of Xuanji that reminded him. It wasn't hard to connect the subject of Xuanji and the two generals Pei, and the north was their territory. Fu Yao once said in passing that prior to his ascension, General Pei Jr. slaughtered a city. Which city? It could very well be the kingdom of Banyu. The upper court wouldn't bat an eyelash at something like this. Everyone needed to spill some blood if they wanted to do great things, but slaughtering a city wasn't anything glorious after all. If the story spread too far, it would affect the number of new believers, so of course there would be some cover-ups after Ascension. Thus, even if everyone knew something of the sort happened, they probably didn't know the details, or didn't care to know. Besides, unless someone possessed some sort of deep grudge, who would have had the time or motivation to dig up his past and offend the support behind his back? Shailian spoke slowly. That Mudface said there was someone among us who visited this city 50 or 60 years ago. At first, I thought he was lying to deceive us into getting closer, but his words may have very well been true. Before, in that group of people, the one I was most suspicious of was you. The caravan followed you, and you could take them anywhere. I had never seen a single scorpion snake in the years I lived near Banyu, and now, while randomly seeking shelter from the sandstorm, they just happened to show up. I asked you to come search for the Shanyu fern with us, but just before we left, you gave the directions to the ruins to the others, so they could follow in our footsteps if they could no longer sit still. Earlier, on top of the walls, I already said that if anything were to happen, I would go forward first. You, who was always calm, suddenly jumped and died a meaningless death. Shailian continued after a pause. Your actions were strange and illogical at every turn. That it took me until now to realize who you are really is too late. Isn't that right, General Pei Jr.? Or should I use your current name, Zhao? Abruptly, everything became still. It was a moment before a frigid voice spoke. Did you not suspect that the Mudface might have been talking about the red-clothed boy next to you? Just as he spoke, a stream of flames suddenly lit up across the sinner's pit. Under the light, two bloody silhouettes were revealed. One was San Lang, dressed in red, standing properly and with his weapon already tucked away. The other was a plainly clothed young man with a sword tightly in hand, still brandished at the ready. The plain-clothed young man was covered in blood, looking like he was also dressed in red. His expression was cold and reserved, and he was carrying someone over his shoulders. It was indeed Ah Zhao. To be fair, whether it was General Pei Jr. himself or Ah Zhao, that composed, calm, and collected aura never changed. Only Shalian never thought in that direction, so he hadn't connected the two until now. The one he was carrying over his shoulder was Banyu. It seemed he had called forth the snakes in order to steal her away during the chaos. Now that his identity was revealed, he no longer needed to create havoc, and the snake deluge ceased its bombardment. He sheathed his sword and gently laid Banyu on the ground. On the side, Kimo was shocked. "Who are you? Didn't you fall to your death?" Ah Zhao didn't spare a look at Kimo, instead staring intently at Sanlong. "Kimo, you really haven't changed in hundreds of years," he said simply in the Banyu tongue. Perhaps this maddeningly calm tone was overly familiar. Kimo's face immediately scrunched up in rage. "It's you? Pei Shou?" If not for the immortal binding rope solidly tying him down, Kimo would have lunged at him to fight to the death. "General Pei Jr.," Shalian said, "those scorpion snakes listened to more than one command, didn't they? You controlled all the snakes that Banyu said no longer obeyed her, and took them out to do harm, correct?" It was me." "Did Banyu teach you how to control the scorpion snakes?" Shalian questioned. "She didn't," Pei Shou said, "but I easily learned for myself how she does it." "General Pei Jr. is exceedingly intelligent after all," Shalian commented. After a pause, he then asked, "When did you two meet? How did you two meet?" Pei Shou, however, gave him a look. "General Hua." Shalian was puzzled. "Why are you calling me by that title too?" Pei Shou asked quietly. "Do you not recognize me, General Hua?" Now Shalian did. The beginning was kind of blurry. Banyu was bullied and ignored by other Banyu children when she was younger, and only a young boy of Yong'an would sometimes pay attention to her. Like Banyu, that boy didn't talk very much. Quite a number of children living on the border were from military families, and many also enlisted in the army when they grew older. Could it be? "It's you?" Shalian was surprised. I can't believe it took me so long to realize it was you." Pei Shou nodded. "It's me. I've only just recognized the general, too." No wonder. So it turned out Banyu and the enemy general had already known each other since childhood. "Did Banyu really heed your order to open the city gates?" Shalian asked. On the other side, Kimo spat and yelled, "Despicable Pei Shou! Untie these ropes! Let me fight him to the death!" Pei Shou said coolly, "First of all, we already had a battle to the death 200 years ago, and you lost. Second of all, how am I despicable?" Kimo exclaimed, "How could we have lost if you two hadn't colluded?" "Kimo, don't deny it," Pei Shou said. "Even though I only had a troop of 2,000, for me, breaking through the city gates was only a matter of time." Shalian couldn't help but interrupt. "Wait a sec. You only had 2,000 under you, and you were sent to invade a country? Why was that? Isn't that no different from sending you to your death? Were you, perhaps, even more elbowed out in the army than I was?" Pei Shou stopped talking. It seemed Shalian had hit it on the head. Shalian then asked, "If you knew it was a sure win, why did you have Banyu open the city gates?" "Because I needed to slaughter the city," Pei Shou replied. "What do you mean?" Shalian asked. "Since you were already going to win, why did you have to slaughter the city?" "It couldn't be his hobby." "It was precisely because victory was at hand that we had to wipe out the city," Pei Shou said. "And it had to be as soon as possible, immediately, leaving none behind." That "leaving none behind" sounded ghastly. Shalian pushed. "And the reason was?" Pei Shou answered. "On the night before the invasion, many of the leaders of Banyu's major clans gathered for a meeting and decided on a secret plot." "What plot?" The people of Banyu were fierce in nature and hated Yong'an to the core, Peisho said. Even knowing they were about to be defeated, they wouldn't submit. So the entire population of the kingdom, the young and the old, the women and the men, all banded together to assemble something. What was that something? Shalian could guess, but he wasn't sure. The word that came out of Peisho's mouth confirmed his suspicions. Explosives. Peisho slowly enunciated each word. They decided that if the kingdom was to fall, the citizens would all carry explosives on their bodies, escape to Yong'an, mix into large, crowded areas, and blow themselves up to cause riots. Meaning, if they had to die, then they would drag as many Yong'an people down with them as they could. If the kingdom should fall, then they would terrorize the country that brought their downfall, which was why they had to be annihilated before those civilians had the time to flee. Shalian instantly turned to Kimo, roughly summarized for him in the Banyu language, and asked, "Is this true?" Kimo looked dauntless and made no attempt to conceal the facts. "It's true." Sanlung quirked his brow at this and commented, "How vile." He said those words in the Banyu tongue, though whether it was intentional was unknown. Kimo replied angrily, "Vile? What right do you have to call us vile? If it wasn't for your assaults, we wouldn't have been forced to make that move. You ruined us, so we sought revenge. How is that wrong?" Peisho responded, "Really now, how about we lay everything out in the open then? How many times did Banyu citizens start riots near the border? How many caravans and travelers going to the western regions from Yong'an were ambushed by Banyu? You intentionally sheltered the bandits that terrorized Yong'an and killed our soldiers sent to exterminate them under the pretense of illegal border crossing. How is that not vile?" Peisho spoke unhurriedly, and his tone was calm, but each word was sharp as a knife. Kimo argued, "But it's because you forcibly occupied our land first that we had no choice but to retaliate." "The border had always been ambiguous, so how can you say we forcibly occupied your land?" Peisho countered. "The lines were clearly drawn. It was you who didn't keep to the agreements." "The lines were drawn by Banyu, and Yong'an never agreed to them. Your so-called drawn border was nothing but pushing us into the desert and keeping the oasis all for yourselves. How ridiculous!" Kimo countered furiously. "The oasis was always ours, our fathers, generation after generation. The Banyu had always lived in the oasis." Both sides had their stories. Just listening to them argue befuddled Shalian. This hostility was making him remember how badly he got beaten up, stuck in between both sides, and he could feel the pain on his face resurface. Peisho seemed to have had enough of quarreling with Kimo and turned to Shalian. "So you see, there are many things in the world that simply cannot be clearly defined or resolved. You can only fight." Shalian sighed. "I'll agree to the first part." Sanlung, on the other hand, said, I'll agree to the second part." Kimo's anger was somewhat curbed, and he suddenly said, "The majority of Yong'an people were shameless, but you were the most shameless I'd ever met, Peisho. You're a cold-hearted man. You didn't kill us for your country, and it wasn't to save your people." Peisho fell silent at this. Kimo continued, "You were the son of an exiled man, looked down on by all. You only wanted to secure your footing in the Yong'an army and keep climbing up, so you had to win that battle. So sad that Banyu still thought you were good and let you use her, and betrayed us for the likes of you." "But isn't General Pei Jr. a descendant of General Pei?" Shalian wondered. To have such a renowned ancestor watching over him, how could he have fallen so astray? "He's not a direct descendant of General Pei," Sanlung said. "He's from, however, many branches out." So that was it. That meant that, had he not ascended, he probably wouldn't have any chance of being blessed by the old ancestors. Pei Shu said quietly, "Banyu had always been my subordinate, and only infiltrated the kingdom of Banyu under my command. She is from both Banyu and Yong'an. Once she chose her side, she had to be loyal to that side, and there was no such thing as betrayal. The Banyu people were evil. I have no regrets about killing them. Suddenly, a voice came from above. No regrets about killing? Well said! Will you say the same about all the travelers who you misled to this pass and who lost their lives in this pit? That voice had come from above everyone's heads, and Shalian instantly looked up. Which great master is here among us? There wasn't a response, but a sudden strange noise. Whoosh! Whoosh! It was like the bellowing of wild winds. When that sound finally came near, Shalian could finally say with certainty it definitely was the bellowing of wild winds. This abrupt gale entered the sinner's pit from above, swept all the way to the bottom, and rolled everyone into the air. Shalian immediately grabbed for San Lung, who was the closest to him, and cried, "Watch out!" San Lung caught him too, face unchanging. Shalian only felt the spinning whirl, their bodies swiftly rising, and after a pause, they started plunging down. Shalian quickly tossed out Roya and coaxed in the midst of the chaos. All right, everything's over. Hurry, my good Roya, come out and give us a hand." After a couple of pets, Roya finally flew out. However, with nothing in the air to grab onto and a giant sinner's pit below, Roya flew around once and shrank back. Feeling resigned, Shalian could only adjust his form for landing. If this was like previous incidents, he would have cratered headfirst 3 feet into the ground. But this time, just before they hit the ground, San Lung reached out and gave him a pull, and he actually landed with his feet flat on the ground. When his boots firmly touched down, he was even a little incredulous, but that feeling went away very quickly when a black-clad silhouette came stumbling before him. Shalian saw who it was and called out in delight. "Nanfeng!" It was Nanfeng indeed, but a disheveled Nanfeng. It looked as if he were rolled in dirt a dozen times before getting thrown into a rambunctious den of beasts to spend the night. His clothes were tattered and frayed, unkempt to the max. Hearing Shalian's call, he only waved and quietly wiped at his face, unable to even speak. Shalian helped him to his feet. "What happened? Did those 2 ladies beat you up?" Before he finished, 2 figures appeared behind Nanfeng and walked over. One of them was the female cultivator in white, with a whisk in her arms, and she greeted Shalian cheerfully. "How do you do, your Royal Highness?" Although Shalian didn't know who this was, proper etiquette still must be followed, but he didn't know how to address her, so he could only smile back and wave. "Greetings, fellow cultivator." The lady in black, standing to the side, glanced coldly at Shalian, but didn't seem to care about him. When her eyes moved on to San Lung, however, she seemed to think he was a dubious figure and stopped for a moment. The gusts earlier had blown everyone out of the pit, and the 2 ladies walked past Shalian, heading straight for Pei Shu. He saw them approach and didn't appear surprised. After all, he had already seen them in town when he was still playing the part of A Zhao. He knelt where he was, bowed his head to the lady cultivator in white, and greeted her quietly. "Lord Windmaster." Shalian was stunned hearing those words. And here he thought she was some menacing ghost or monster. Who knew she was actually a heavenly official? And she was the Windmaster, the one who was giving out 10,000 merits in one go in the communication array. But now that he thought about it in detail, there wasn't anything out of place. At the time, she had said something along the lines of, "Now where did they go? Do I have to dig them out and kill them one by one?" and made him think she was after them. In reality, this "they" might have not meant their group. She could have meant the Banyu soldiers. Shalian thought he was alone in this investigation, and thus naturally thought the lady cultivators were strange and wicked. Shalian couldn't help but feel a nameless reverence toward a heavenly official who could easily hand out 10,000 merits. He turned to Nanfeng. "Why didn't you tell me this was the Windmaster sooner? And here I thought she might be some sort of snake or scorpion spirit. Such impropriety!" Nanfeng's expression darkened. "I didn't know it was the Windmaster. I've never seen the Windmaster like this before. The Windmaster had always been... Never mind." Shalian understood. This was probably a fake appearance the Lord Windmaster donned, so he didn't dig into it. He asked, "Why did the Windmaster come to the Banyu Pass?" "To help out," Nanfeng said. "When we saw them strolling in the streets earlier, they were actually looking for those Banyu soldiers." Shaylien recalled now the first time he asked about the Banyu Pass in the communication array. In the midst of that silent awkwardness, it was the Windmaster's sudden release of 10,000 merits that distracted everyone. The Windmaster had probably taken notice of this query then. As Shaylien mused, the Windmaster crouched down in front of Pei Shu. "Little Pei, I've heard everything, you know." Pei Shu hung his head. The Windmaster demanded, "Do you admit for the past 200 years you are the one who lured all those travelers into the ancient kingdom of Banyu?" Since he was already caught, Pei Shu didn't argue and only replied solemnly, "It was me." "Why?" the Windmaster demanded. After a pause, Pei Shu asked, "Lord Windmaster has long been suspicious. Can you not guess why? Is it only because these souls of the dead are iron proof of the blood on your hands while you were a human, and would become obstacles to your climbing higher in the future?" the Windmaster asked. Pei Shu neither agreed nor disagreed. Shaylien, who was listening from the side, couldn't help but ask, "If anything, why didn't you just kill them directly? Why instead was your method feeding them the living to appease their resentment? How is that different from quenching the thirst of one by using another's flesh and blood?" San Lung replied, "He couldn't." That was true too. In the upper court, every move by a heavenly official like Pei Shu was watched intently by countless eyes. There were many things he couldn't do directly. He couldn't use his true form to come down openly and kill off the resentful spirits of those soldiers, and he couldn't send troops to annihilate them either. This was already a concealed affair. If there was too much of a stir, wouldn't it attract everyone's gaze? At most, he could only send a clone like Ah Zhao down quietly, using the scorpion snakes that Banyu was a known expert in manipulating to go out and cause harm, attracting passers-by to feed the resentful spirits and disperse their resentment. It was no doubt murder by proxy. "Your General Pei wouldn't have ever done something like this," the Windmaster said. "This time, I'm afraid you've crossed the line." The fact that he would release a clone to cause havoc at the Banyu Pass for almost 200 years and lure in numerous passers-by down the wrong path and into the ruins to die in the mouths of Banyu soldiers. For a heavenly official, this was no small issue whatsoever. Pei Shu had his head bowed low. "This junior knows." The Windmaster swept her whisk. "As long as you understand, reflect on yourself and think on it. We'll talk in the heavens." "I understand," Pei Shu said quietly. Having finished talking with Pei Shu, the Windmaster shuffled the whisk to the back collar of her robe, stood up, and smiled at Shaylien. "Your Royal Highness the Crown Prince, I've heard much about you." To Shaylien, "heard much about you" really wasn't a compliment, but nonetheless, it was just meaningless pleasantries, so he smiled back. "I'm sure it's nothing. I've heard much about you as well, Lord Windmaster." "Sorry about before, by the way," the Windmaster said. Shaylien paused. "Before? What happened before?" "Didn't you all run into a windstorm in the desert?" Thinking back, Shaylien could almost taste the mouthfuls of sand. He replied, "Yes." "I started that," the Windmaster said. The Windmaster explained. "That windstorm was meant to stop you all from going near the kingdom of Banyu. But not only did you not get blown away, you went around and ended up in Banyu anyway." The longer Shaylien listened, the more he felt that something wasn't right. First, she used a windstorm to stop them from getting to Banyu Pass, and now this whole thing was suddenly out in the open. What did it mean? Shaylien didn't respond, biding his time to see what the other would say. The Windmaster then continued, "But in regard to this whole ordeal, it would be best if your Highness got no further involved." Shaylien stole a look at Banyu, curled up on the ground, and felt his dread rise. He was already worried that if this scandal were to reach the upper court, the officials could easily muck up the truth, add strokes where they shouldn't, and have Banyu take all the blame while little Pei ran off scot-free. With Windmaster's sudden appearance, telling him not to get further involved, didn't this cement that they would protect little Pei? Without any change in expression, Shaylien stepped forward to stand in front of Banyu, hiding her behind him, and said warmly, "But I'm already further involved, so telling me to leave now is fairly pointless, no?" The Windmaster flashed a smile. "Don't worry, you can take the State Preceptor of Banyu away with you." Now that was unexpected. Shaylien was slightly taken aback, and the Windmaster continued. "While you were all in the pit, we heard everything from up here. Although the state preceptor has turned into a wrath, when I roamed the city, I saw that she had drawn the array to trap the Banyu soldiers and released all the captured mortals. She didn't hurt anyone, and even saved people. The only ones I'm taking are General Pei Jr. and Chemo. You don't have to worry about me placing undue blame on anyone. Shaylien relaxed. Much ashamed, I was suspicious. It's normal to worry, the Windmaster said. There's certainly an unpleasant culture in the upper court, after all. The lady in black looked as if she couldn't stay for a moment longer and spoke up. Are you done? If you're done, let's go. The Windmaster rebutted. What's the rush? The more you rush, the more I want to talk. Still, she turned her head and smiled, taking out a folding fan from her waist. Your Highness, if there's nothing else, we'll see you in the upper court? Shaylien nodded, and the Windmaster opened her fan. On the fan was the word for wind, Feng, on a slant, and 3 inclined lines like the wind on the back. That had to be the Windmaster's spiritual device. She fanned forward 3 times and backward 3 times. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew from out of nowhere. The wind drew dust and sand, and Shaylien raised his sleeve to block the debris. When the wind died down, the 2 ladies, Pei Shu and Chemo, had all disappeared, leaving behind only Shaylien, San Lung, Nanfeng, and the curled-up Banyu on the ground. Shaylien dropped his sleeve, still a little dazed. What just happened? San Lung casually strolled over. A pretty good thing. Shaylien looked at him. Is it? Yeah, the Windmaster was trying to help you by telling you not to get involved. Nanfeng walked over too. That's right, you've dug too deep into this business already. The only thing left to do is file a complaint to the Heavenly Emperor. Don't get yourself any more involved. Shaylien got it. Is it because of General Pei? Correct, Nanfeng said. This time you have thoroughly offended him. Shaylien laughed. I knew I was going to offend someone one of these days. I guess it doesn't matter who. Nanfeng furrowed his brows. Don't think I'm joking. After the Palace of Divine Might, the next most powerful martial palace is Mingguang. General Pei thinks very highly of Little Pei and has long been trying to oust Xuan Yizhen. He's gonna come knocking, looking for trouble. Xuan Yizhen is the martial god that rules the West, right? Shaylien asked. That's the one, Nanfeng replied. Xuan Yizhen is also a new official. He ascended around the same time as Pei Shu. He's young and a little, but very powerful. General Pei intended for Pei Shu to take over all the devotees of the West, and he's done well for himself, especially these last few years. Now, with you dragging this scandal out into the open, it's not looking good for Pei Shu. Maybe he'll even be banished. If he gets banished, your luck is going to turn for the worse, too. Shaylien rubbed his forehead, mentally taking note that from now on he would have to be more mindful when eating, drinking, and walking. San Lung, however, didn't think it was a big deal. Don't worry, Pei Ming is too proud. He won't do anything underhanded. Nanfeng gave him a look. What about the Windmaster? Shaylien asked. She told me not to get involved, meaning she's the one who will file the complaint. In that case, wouldn't she become the one offending General Pei? I can't have that. Let's call her back. Nanfeng, do you know the password to her personal communication array? You needn't worry about the Windmaster, Nanfeng said. General Pei can hurt you, but he won't touch her. She may be younger than you, but she's still more successful in the heavens. Shaylien wasn't shocked into silence, but was instead thinking, who in the heavens is more of a failure than me? I don't think there's anyone. San Lung laughed. With that backing, of course she's successful. Are you talking about the lady in black? She looks to be a strong character too, Shaylien remarked. No, San Lung replied. But she must also be one of the 5 elemental masters that make up wind, water, rain, earth, and thunder. I recommend not offending her. The Windmaster could start a twister from nowhere, which was obviously powerful, but the lady in black was stronger. Shaylien kept thinking that the lady had noticed something in San Lung and felt rather concerned. I agree. Still, there were words that Shaylien thought didn't need to be said, so he swallowed them. He thought, even someone with a strong backing may not be successful. Back in the day, the Crown Prince of Shanle had the support of the Heavenly Emperor, who ruled all 3 realms for 1,000 years. He was still a failure. Shalian picked up his fallen bamboo hat, dusted it off, and sighed in relief upon seeing that it wasn't flattened. He tied it back around his neck and looked at Nanfeng. You weren't pursued and beaten up by those two ladies the whole time, were you? Yes, we fought the whole time, Nanfeng replied, face dark. Shalian patted his shoulders. Thank you for your hard work. Suddenly, he remembered another hard worker and turned around. Where's Fu Yao? Wasn't he watching the bitten man? Nanfeng responded. Shalian didn't recall seeing Fu Yao after getting blown out of the sinner's pit. Actually, ever since Ajao revealed himself, there had been no sight of him. If he didn't leave then, he must have left when the wind blew. Shalian wasn't actually that worried. He figured Fu Yao didn't want to get mixed up in this mess, so he ran off. But having heard Nanfeng say bitten, he snapped out of it, and they both cried at the same time. The Shanyu Fern! The sky is only just lightning. No rush, Sanlong said. However, there was no such thing as no rush when it came to saving lives. Even if they were far from the 24-hour deadline, who knew if anything had happened in all this time? Shalian had no time to think about Fu Yao. He hurriedly lifted Banyu onto his back and ran toward the palace grounds. Once at the palace, Shalian laid Banyu down and immediately picked a few large bundles of the Shanyu Fern. That mudface was still on the ground, its face a bloody mess among its white bones. In the past, Shalian would have buried it, but first of all, he was in a hurry to save people, and second, that man had been buried in the ground for 50 or 60 years. He must not want to go back. But the corpse of the dead merchant was missing, and Shalian stopped, puzzled. Just then, Sanlung emerged from the palace with a small clay pot. When Shalian saw, he immediately called out, Good, Sanlung, thank you! Banyu was weak, and they couldn't rouse her, so Shalian shrank her and tucked her into the pot. With the ferns collected, the group rushed back. It had been about 8 hours since they left. Returning to where Fu Yao had drawn the circle, Shalian saw that many were still sitting properly within it, too scared to venture out. The old man who had taken Nanfeng's pill was doing all right, and after applying the herb to his wound and having him eat the plant, he was able to stand and walk after resting for a while. Shalian didn't think there was any need to tell them what the herb used to grow on. After some time, the merchants settled down, and they began to worry. Where's Tian Sheng? Why haven't the others returned yet? Shalian had been too busy picking herbs to find him earlier. Plus, there was not a single Banyu soldier left in the ruins, so he hadn't bothered with Tian Sheng and the others. He was just thinking about going back to search for them when he heard the voice of a boy yelling as he ran closer and closer. Shalian turned his head, and sure enough, it was Tian Sheng. The boy had a large bundle of the Shanyu Fern in his arms, and behind him were 2 other merchants, all huffing and puffing. Shalian asked them what had happened, and learned that while on top of the walls of the sinner's pit, Banyu swept the soldiers down and captured Tian Sheng and the merchants. They were terrified, but Banyu only led them down from the pit and directed them where to go before sending them on their way. They escaped, picked the herbs, buried the dead merchant's body, and rushed back as fast as they could. Yet, they were still slower than Shalian. In any case, Shalian escorted the caravan out of the Gobi Desert and ended this journey at last. Before they bid farewell, Tian Sheng snuck out to find him and whispered mysteriously, Guga, I have a question for you. Ask away, Shalian said. You're actually a god, aren't you? Shalian was astonished, but also a little touched. In the past, there was a time when he'd holler and announce to the world, I'm a god! I'm the Crown Prince, His Royal Highness! And no one would believe him. This time, he hadn't even said anything, and the other party asked if he was a god. It made him both astonished and moved. Tian Sheng added immediately, I saw you use spells. Don't worry, I won't tell. How would you even tell? No one would believe you, Shalian thought. Tian Sheng continued, If not for you, I would have gotten thrown into that pit by that bunch of ugly ghost soldiers. When I get home, I'll build you a temple and worship you. Shalian watched him pat his chest and make very big hand gestures, and couldn't help but let out a laugh. He smiled. Then, thank you. San Lung was standing to the side, and he chuckled lightly for some unknown reason. Shailian didn't think it was because he thought a child's naive words were ridiculous. Although children had no idea just how much work went into constructing a temple, receiving such a promise, whether it would be fulfilled or not, was nevertheless a happy occasion. After much hassling, he made up a random title, the Scrap Immortal, to leave behind. Then he waved and walked off in the opposite direction. Nanfeng drew another teleportation array and sent them all back to Puqi Shrine. Opening the door, Shailian took out the straw mat, laid it open on the ground, and collapsed on it like a dead body. This was done all in one breath. San Lung sat down next to him and watched him, a hand propping up his chin. Shailian sighed. How long were we gone? About 3-4 days, San Lung replied. Shailian sighed again. Only 3-4 days? Why am I so tired? Ever since he ascended, he was working to the bone like a dog. No lie. After he was done sighing, Shailian looked up. Nanfeng? Why haven't you gone to report back yet? Report back where? Nanfeng asked. Aren't you an official of Nanyang Palace? Won't your general miss you after 3-4 days? My general isn't in the palace right now, so he won't miss me, Nanfeng replied. Shailian rolled over and got up. All right. It'll be good too, if you stay. What are you doing? Nanfeng asked. Shailian looked at him cheerfully. I'm going to cook you a meal, as a reward for your hard work. Nanfeng's face dropped drastically. He raised his hand, pressed 2 fingers together, and touched his temple as if receiving someone's private communication. He got up and turned. There's an emergency at the palace. I'll see you later. Shailian raised his hand. What? Nanfeng, don't go! How can there suddenly be an emergency? I really want to thank you for everything. There's an emergency! Nanfeng roared and ran out the door. Shailian sat back down on the mat and looked at San Lung. I guess he's not hungry. There was a loud bang before San Lung could reply, and it was Nanfeng who'd run back, blocking the doorway. You two! Shailian and San Lung were sitting together on the mat, and they both looked up at him. What about us two? Nanfeng pointed his finger at San Lung, then at Shailian, words stuck in his throat, unable to speak. Then finally, I'll be back. You're welcome any time, Shailian said. Nanfeng gave San Lung one last stink eye before closing the door and leaving. Shailian crossed his arms and tilted his head like San Lung and said, Looks like there really is an emergency. He turned to look at the youth next to him and smiled cheerfully. He's not hungry. How about you? San Lung smiled cheerfully back. I'm starving. Shailian grinned and stood up again, before turning around and casually tidying the altar table. All right then, what do you want to eat, Wacheng? Behind him, there was silence, then chuckling. I still prefer the name San Lung.